Hello everyone, it's Enigma here, and today I want to talk about something that I've always wanted to talk about in a video, and this is just something that I feel needs to be talked about. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about a Nintendo system that Nintendo just does not seem to want to let go, to let go of. And of course, but there's a little backstory. So obviously we know that the Switch is like the hot console for Nintendo right now. This is the console that a lot of people are going out and buying. It's been such a huge hit ever since it launched back in March of 2017. A lot of people have been buying Switches these recent years, and just so much people have just been, buying and spending their money on, just Switch stuff and, Switch games and stuff like that. However, the Switch is not the only console that Nintendo is, making games for. The Nintendo is still making games for the Nintendo 3DS. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you guys have got to know what the 3DS is. The 3DS is just a ton of great games. Some of the most, iconic, just games that I hold close to my heart, and just so many good games are on the system, and it's just such a great console. However, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the 3DS these recent years. A lot of people really want the system to die. They really just want it to just move on. They just want Nintendo to move on to just the Switch. They don't want the 3DS around anymore. The 3DS was a good console, but a lot of people just do not want it around. I want to give my opinion on the whole topic because I feel like this was definitely a video that I had to make because the 3DS is still around, and, I just feel like this is a pretty important video to make. And I want to give my opinion on whether I think the system should die or whether it should stay around for a long time. So that's the topic of this video. Now, the 3DS launched on February 26th, 2011. That was 8 years ago. That was such a long time ago. That was like over half a decade ago since the 3DS launched, and they are still holding on to this console, and they're still trying to make the 3DS sell, and they're really trying to get these games out there for 3DS owners. And yeah, I just want to give my opinion on this. So, yeah, the 3DS launched back in 2011. Now it is 2019. So, I have a little chart right here. I'm going to be talking about sales throughout the 3DS's lifetime. I'm going to talk about each year and how much 3DS's were sold each year. So, for 2011 does not have any, list. I can't find a list that has 2011 listed. So I can't, there's nothing for 2011. There's only 2012 to 2018. So yeah. Anyways, 2012 was a pretty good year for, buying the 3DS. 13.53 million 3DSs were sold that year. That's a pretty good amount of 3DSs that were sold. So that's a good chart. There wasn't a whole lot of, big AAA games I could think of that came out that year, but it was the start of the 3DS's lifetime, and still some people probably have gotten a 3DS at that time. That was probably the year I bought my 3DS. So that's cool. 2013 was the biggest year for the 3DS. This is by far the biggest year. 13.95 million 3DSs were sold that year. It makes sense. There was a huge chunk of AAA games. The two that come to mind that came out that year was Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon and Pokemon X and Y. Those two games both released in 2013, and obviously those could be system sellers, so obviously people went and got a 3DS for those two games. It makes a whole lot of sense. 2014 comes around, and 12.24 million copies were sold. Okay, it doesn't top 2012 and 2013 with their copies sold, but the 3DS still had a large chunk of, sellers. And it makes sense, Smash for 3DS came out that year, so it makes a whole lot of sense. Then, once 2015 came around, that's when, the sales started to easily decline, and not a lot of people were really caring about the 3DS anymore. Well, not really. 2015 wasn't bad, but it could have been a lot better. 2015 sales were 8.73 million. Sure, that may sound like a lot, but that doesn't compare to the other years, especially with last year's 12.24 million. That's definitely a large drop from sales. Then we get into 2016, which basically marks the near death of the 3DS. 6.79 million copies of the 3DS were sold. That's sad. There was not a whole lot of 3DS sales that year. Then 2017, there actually was an increase in sales, 7.27 million sales. I don't know what happened that made the sales increase, but it makes sense. I don't think there was a huge chunk of, big AAA games that came out in 2016 besides Pokemon Sun and Moon. But other than that, that's really all I can think of that was a big AAA game that year for the 3DS. And then 2018 which was by far the 3DS's worst year. 6.4 million copies of the 3DS were sold. That's sad. And yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of people that bought the 3DS in 2018. 2019, I could easily see this year being the worst sales for the 3DS, because I just don't know a lot of people that are going to be buying a 3DS in 2019. And think about it, there was a huge AAA game that came out last year, which is obviously Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, that came out for the Switch. And a lot of people are gonna want to buy Switches for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It's a huge system seller. And think about this year, there's going to be a lot of, huge AAA games coming out this year. Like Animal Crossing, the new Luigi's Mansion game, Pokemon Sword and Shield. There's going to be a lot of big AAA games coming out for the Switch this year. And it's just going to make the 3DS even more obsolete. And it doesn't help with the fact that the majority of the 3DS titles that we're getting nowadays are literally just remakes. Now, I did not mind the Luigi's Mansion remake. Sorry for that skip, guys. Anyways, as I was saying, I was totally fine with the Luigi's Mansion remake. That made me happy, since after Super Mario 64, obviously I talked about how Super Mario 64 is definitely my favorite video game of all time. I think Luigi's Mansion would probably be my second favorite game of all time. And seeing that getting remade on the 3DS honestly made me happy. I didn't care what system it was on. But that's mostly because I absolutely adore Luigi's Mansion. However, not everyone is going to like that remake as much as I did, and not a lot of people, were really happy about that. Because I know a lot of people really wanted, Luigi's Mansion on the Switch, and a lot of people were very disappointed at that. Now it really doesn't matter, since we're getting a new game on the Switch of Luigi's Mansion, but still, that did make people a little bit upset. But, as I was saying, the 3DS games that we're getting nowadays are either, like non-important third-party ports, or Nintendo remakes, basically. That's basically been the whole 3DS game lineup as of these recent years. This has been kind of like the trend ever since, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. After that, I feel like the 3DS has just all been mainly remakes and stuff like that. So, now we're here at 2019, and we got Bowser's Inside Story remake for the 3DS this year. And, yeah, it's still pretty lame for the 3DS. So, do I think the 3DS should die? Now, I'm gonna say this right now. Not everyone is able to afford a Switch. Right now, the Switch is at, like, $300. You have to pay $300 for a Switch. The 3DS is, I think, a lot cheaper. I think the 3DS is, like, $100. You can't compare the 3DS to the Switch. Obviously, there's going to be still a huge, fan demand for 3DS games, because obviously not everyone will be able to afford a Switch. Honestly, that doesn't matter to me because I do have a Switch, but not everyone is able to afford one. So, the 3DS is kind of there for those who don't have a 3DS. However, or for those who don't have a Switch. However, the thing about that is that most of the games are, in fact, remakes, and that most of them seem to be kind of not really good remakes. They're not really superior to the games they originate from. Like, if I were to play Luigi's Mansion in 2019, I would honestly still play the original GameCube version over the 3DS version. If I were to play Kirby's Epic Yarn, I would play the Wii version over the 3DS version. Simply put, I don't feel like a lot of people are really going to be caring, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people that do own a 3DS would play the original games over the remakes on the 3DS. And that's kind of my opinion on it. So, I do think the 3DS should kind of die, and it really hurts me to say that, because I've basically been throughout the entire 3DS hype cycle. I've heard about all the news when the 3DS first hit and first launched, and, a lot of people were really getting a 3DS, and it was definitely a huge system seller. But now it's been a lot of years, it's almost been a decade since the 3DS launched, and they're still not letting go of it, and I honestly think it should die. The 3DS has definitely had a good run, and I will be upset when Nintendo does announce that the 3DS will be dead. I'll be honestly very upset, and it hurts to, hear about that. But not everything can last forever. Like, same with the Switch, Like, yeah, the Switch just launched, 2 years ago, but there's always going to be an end to a video game console, and the Switch is not going to last forever. And, unfortunately, I think the 3DS is, starting to lose popularity, and it is slowly getting to its grave. It's sad to hear about that, but I do think that the 3DS should die. That does not mean that I don't love the 3DS. I absolutely do. There's so many great games on that system. Some of them are some of my favorite video games of all time. But Nintendo just needs to let go. And besides, if the Switch is a hybrid console, I don't feel there's a need for, a 3DS in a handheld, since there's a hybrid console and you can take that both on the go and on home console. But other than that, I do think that the 3DS should just go, and I think it should just die peacefully. Just let it have the impact it's had. It's been the first, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the first video game system that has ever had 3D, and that's a pretty monumental achievement. And honestly, though, I just think it needs to die. It's been a good run, but I will really miss the 3DS if it does die, but I just feel it's time. I feel it's time to just let it go. But that's my opinion on the 3DS, and whether I think it should stay or if it should die. But anyways, what are your guys' opinions? Do you guys think that the 3DS should stay, or do you guys think it's finally time for the 3DS to just die out? Let me know in the comments down below, and I would love to hear it. Anyways, this has been Enigma, and peace. See you next time.